Good morning,
Good.
Ivan.
What's up, Jose? Good morning, man. How you feeling?
Everything is good. How you doing?
Sipping on my coffee.
All right.
I I I fell asleep late last night. I was watching Cobra Kai.
Oh, okay. Okay. Talk about
have you watched that?
absolutely. You talk about courage to continue and having fortitude and everything. And I mean, it's got a lot of
Uh,
drama, but
yeah.
it's
No, there are
about
definitely parallels. I didn't necessarily see the connections, but when you think about it, even on a superficial level,
oh my
absolutely.
God. I mean,
There are a lot of connections to having courage. Yeah, definitely.
any kind of sports thing has you know has some stuff like what we talk about is digging deep and to get things accomplished.
You know what I like about it is that it's the plot is so convoluted, right? You have like all these different
It's a lot of layers.
you have all these different layers, these subplots going
Yeah,
on,
yeah,
but you could see how they're all meshed together,
yeah, yeah,
and like each of these layers have to kind of resolve itself in order for this grand plot to
yeah,
emerge.
yeah. Now you know what's funny. And I know today's episode we're gonna have somebody on and we're gonna discuss weight loss. Uh, but it's great that you brought up Cobra Kai because we were talking last week about ages, and you see how our generation, which is Ralph Macchio and the other guy, um, how they deal with the millennials and how they want to bring
Oh yeah.
that tough,
You,
the old school way that we were brought up, and the new schools, the world is not that anymore. But it's great because it shows the the good parts of both, and also the bad parts of both. Both being a disciplinary has one thing, and being coddled has another thing, and it's great how they have that experience. I love that part about that show.
it's I yeah. I think that you could, like, growing up in the 80s and 90s, you could appreciate that narrative, that tough love narrative.
Yeah,
Like his language is very crude, it's very raw,
yeah,
and it definitely doesn't comply with politically correct
yeah,
language that's used today,
yeah,
right? It's they were talking about, there was a scene where he was talking about how everyone gets a trophy,
yeah,
and I just and it seems like a moot point, but in a lot of ways it's emblematic of this generation. We've become very
yeah,
soft, we've become very sensitized, I like to say.
yeah,
And again, he said it in a tongue-in-cheek way, but when we get sensitized, right, just as a global societal level, you could argue that we are becoming weaker. We become, you know, the peanut allergies, right?
yeah,
There was a couple of scenes like that.
yeah,
We become soft to language, and it's true that in the real world, we have to have the ability to withstand the harshness of life. And this is
absolutely.
something that he was trying to instill in his students.
Yeah, yeah, and it worked in trying to get things done, and so they talked about it's about being bullied and getting through those problems. You needed some mental toughness, and you saw how it changed them. But you also see how there's two other things that's interesting, and I feel it has a lot to do with what we talk about um, every week at show, because it also touches on, you have the mental toughness, you have the underdog story, but when does the underdog become the dog, and then in essence becomes the bully? It's that shift, and it's interesting. There's been a lot of videos on YouTube over the last years before they did Cobra Kai on analyzing who was the real bully in that show. Was it Ralph Macchio or the blonde guy? And it's great that they put that into the show because when you see it from this perspective, That's what happens in conflicts and relationships. You think the other guy's the bully, but is he really?
It's
Ralph
true.
Macchio is
That's
the
a good
guy
point. There's
that came.
definitely a role reversal there in like who's the agonist, who's the antagonist.
Well, when you
But
have a conflict, you're looking at the other person's looking at you as the bully, but you're like, wait a minute, you did this. So it's great that they deconstruct it in that way to show that there's many sides to conflicts. There's many sides to adversity, and I'm fascinated in seeing what their takeaway is going to be at the end of it all. I mean, there's a lot of drama, a lot of teenage stuff in it, but overall, these ideas are great that they're taking them on and
so
developing.
no. I think it's a good show, and I think again it's representative of a lot of the themes that are current today. About toughness and about instilling value and about overcoming adversity. And
Yeah, yeah,
it's emblematic of the show. Um, Today, not to go off on a tangent, but I do want to kind of
no, go
go
ahead.
back to our original theme and what we
Yeah,
wanted to talk about today.
go ahead.
Um, it's that what is the central theme here? What is the overarching theme? And it's that we adapt, right? We could adapt even through hardship, like in the show. And one of the things that I want to talk about today with you is weight loss. Weight loss is a really big topic. And when you look at the numbers, when you look at epidemiological numbers, right? Like, where are we going as a country, and where are we heading as a nation? One could argue that over the past 5, 6 decades, we've become bigger, weaker, and sicker. Yet, we you would think that we've become smarter. So why, as a scientific community, um, so why is it that obesity is such a big problem that persists today? And I would have to say, like the way I could answer a lot of questions rather, is that it depends. It's so multifactorial. There's so many layers. Hi, Zoe. How are you? Hi, Clara. Good morning. Hey, Celicia. Good morning. Good morning, everyone.
Good morning.
So it's so multifactorial. There's no simple answer, but we can't. One thing that I think we have to say is we can't simply turn our back to this. And it's interesting because in Cobra Kai, he's very crude. He has this very raw language. Good morning, Crystal. He has this raw language, and he what do you call it? He's obesophobic. He makes some disparaging comments about
Yeah.
people that are big, and it's interesting because we've become so sensitized that sometimes that in and of itself could hurt us because we're not addressing the elephant in the room. No pun intended, but sometimes we have to talk about the things that are a little uncomfortable just to get to the meat of the matter and say, look, this is a problem that we've identified. The numbers are growing. How much of it, how much do we coddle people and say,
Well,
and be careful with the language that we use,
well,
but at the same time, not address the issue.
it's funny because words. I've been saying this a lot in the last week or so. Words are important. Words. We use certain words, and they mean a lot. But when you look at it in with that lens, right? Words are actually holding people back because we get caught up in the language. So it's a fat guy. You're fat, Oh, it becomes about being called fat, but you're not addressing the issue, like you just said. We get caught up in the language a little bit and the sensitivity to the language in society today. It's a big um, it's a big focus. It's a big focus on sensitivity to language, and it can't hold us back.
Well,
It's in the movie,
I
the
think
show, how they presented the show.
you know what it is that you know, eh, and we spoke about this last week, but we're so unique and so multi-layered we're like ecosystems, and we have to be very careful. Yes, we have to address it, but we have to address it strategically. And using labels can be hurtful and could hurt the
Absolutely.
process.
Yeah.
So we have to be aware of that. Sticks and stones. That whole adage, "Sticks and stones will break my bones, but words will never harm me." That's not. I couldn't disagree anymore. Language is really influential, either in a positive or negative way. But you can't let tough areas immobilize us as a society from addressing these issues. And so when it comes to obesity, when it comes to people being overweight, we have to address it. Like it's interesting. In what I do, Pamela says education, emotion, and empathy. How to speak the truth in empathetic way. Yeah, well said. I agree.
That's it.
We have to.
That's it.
But the thing is, sometimes we could be, we could be overly careful. We could be almost like walking on eggshells when it comes to talking about the subject matter.
We could
And that in and of itself could serve as a detriment, because then we avoid it. Let me just say this, and I think this is interesting because as a physical therapist, one of the things that we do when we're managing patients is we try to address each person as an ecosystem. We try to address all the factors that influence their diagnosis. I can't tell you that one of the more common diagnoses that I see is low back pain. And invariably, when you look at the research, weight is an associated factor. Is it? And it's very nuanced. I don't want to say just weight. Weight has a lot of weight is an associated factor with back pain. So it is. It lies incumbent upon us as healthcare professionals to address that in some way. And it's interesting because over the years, I've spoken with other professionals, other physios, and they always like to tiptoe around it or almost avoid it altogether because it's such a provocative topic. But I find that counterproductive, because if you avoid the topic, you essentially are avoiding an area that could have a strong influence on a patient's outcome. And it's not so much, it's very nuanced because, and I don't want to get into the nuances of weight and pain. However, I would say that losing weight has a host of benefits. And when it comes to managing like musculoskeletal pain, you can't deny that it's a factor that lends itself to a favorable resolution, a recovery, if you will, from having knee pain or back pain or a number of maladies. So we can't tiptoe around it either, although we have to be, as Pamela said, empathetic.
No, and I think the point is we have to be empathetic, or look at these things with empathy as far as language, but not get lost and allow that issue to cloud the issue that you're trying to address. So yeah, be selective with the language, and I think that's where the show's going to evolve too. But also not get caught up in that. Don't let that cloud what you're trying to get done. They're in there to try to, become tougher. Well, in order for you to shed that, you can't get caught up in the sensitivity for that show, for what they're trying to do. You can't let language take over. Well, you can't let the sensitivity to the language overtake you. I think you can address the language, but not forget the cloud.
And I think that's what makes, we started off the show talking about Cobra Kai, but I think that's what makes Cobra Kai so fascinating, because it's emblematic of a lot of things that are going on right now. The language that the Sensei Lawrence uses is very provocative. And do we need, so I think the question that emerges from this conversation is, do we need some of that crude, raw language, or should we tiptoe around things? Anyway, look, language certainly could be a barrier into improving things, without a doubt. Language certainly is a barrier. Um, it can impede progress
Yeah,
if
it
we
can.
use language the wrong way.
Yeah.
But since today's topic is going to be about weight loss, and this is again a growing problem, I want to speak from an experiential standpoint. You had agreed before going on that you were willing to talk about
Well,
your own journeys with weight management.
Yeah. Well, I think weight management overall, I think is something that it's a societal issue, right? There's obesity is prevalent in society, so that would mean that it touches everything. We all got to think about it. I mean, you think about it every day as well. Make conscious decisions, more conscious than I would. Well, my decisions are based on a lifestyle, and you've changed your lifestyle to be able to have a certain way of living. So food is very much so, a big part of society. It's a problem, the weight loss. So to get to me, some personal things, having 3 kids, a wife that is an excellent cook. The biggest challenges personally have been just staying away from that meat. You know what I'm saying? It's there every day, and you try to.
She cooks Ben Neal every day.
No. It's just an easy example. Yeah, she cooks it.
No, she cooks. She cooks well. She cooks very well. For those that are listening, Jose and his wife had a restaurant in Yonkers, and it was an excellent. They had excellent food. So I could just imagine if I had a significant other that cooked as good as she did. My God, I probably weigh 30 pounds more.
I mean, you try to, you're conscious of what you eat, and you couldn't stay away. You were there.
You know what? I got to tell you that. That's a good point. That's a good point, because in a lot of ways, right, you're a product of your environment, and your environment being with having kids, having a wife that cooks very well. You're around a lot of, you're around cooking and food, right? She's cooking for you, I'm assuming, and for the kids. And if she's a good cook, it's interesting. I think what's interesting is that, like, from an evolutionary perspective, right? Food is energy. Food is energy for survival. And we're always kind of inclined to function in a way where, what should we do? And, how do we prepare ourselves in the event of some type of catastrophe? And in that regard, that's why we have fat reserves, right? Because our body's always preparing itself for the worst case scenario, like famine. And so when we do have access to foods, oftentimes we will eat those foods. It's one of the reasons why, when I'm giving advice for people with weight loss, I say, hey, if it's in your cupboard, if it's in your refrigerator, the likelihood is that you're going to eat it. So, this thing about discipline, right? Right. Yeah. You're in this environment where your wife is cooking, she's buying foods and snacks for the kids. And, we could talk about discipline, but could one argue that evolutionarily we're designed to prepare ourselves for the worst case scenario, which is creating fat reserves? So if it's in our vicinity, we are going to eat it. Prehistoric man, when they found fruit in abundance, they would engorge in that eating, right? They would engorge in anything where it was in abundance. So if our refrigerator or cabinets are filled with snacks in abundance, is that primitive desire to eat it? And so one of the ways to combat that, and it's very difficult because you and I have very different living circumstances. Is it a discipline issue? It's tough. I think you're as strong. Your discipline is as strong as your closest temptation. Once again, your discipline is as strong as your strongest temptation. You can't take a recovering alcoholic and say, "Bro, let's hang out at a bar." You feel me?
Yeah, I like that.
You can't, right? Because think about it. You're gonna be. Your discipline is as close as to your closest. Your discipline is as strong as your closest temptation. So if you're looking to lose weight and you know that you got Oreos on that third shelf in the cabinet and you're up watching TV, is that prehistoric primitive reflex to seek survival no matter what in the face of adding to your fat reserves going to kick in? And is that right? Is this a prehistoric primitive thing, or is this a function of discipline? I gotta say that I've learned that it's more of the former and not the latter. And this is one of the reasons why I tell people, listen, man, if you're going to look to lose weight, you got to clean out your cupboard. You got to clean out your cabinet. You can't have things that you're going to be tempted by. This is why married men shouldn't be going to the clubs.
You're right. You're right.
And going to the strip clubs.
Yeah.
Why? Because it's the same, and you can say that about a lot of things.
Yeah.
Your discipline is as strong as your closest temptation. You have no business doing that.
No, and it's interesting that you say that, because when you think about it, and you made a comparison, a contrast between yourself and me, and it's lifestyle, and you got to kind of overhaul your lifestyle in order to be more successful and having better, not habits, but better.
But I think in your case, it's tougher because the whole family has to be on the same path, right? They have to have the same motivations. And if your intention is to eat clean and to eat fruits, vegetables, whole food diets, but then you know that you have ice cream sandwiches in the freezer,
a pizza place that no one wants to cook.
That's what I'm saying. It's difficult.
It makes it.
So barriers are important. We spoke about language being a barrier in terms of sometimes not addressing the elephant in the room. But then we spoke about temptation, essentially our living environments. And I got to tell you, my living environment, again, is drastically different than yours. I live alone. I cook for myself or I order out. So it's easier for me. I would have just imagined how difficult it is for you if you're trying to be on the, straight and narrow path of eating whole food based diets. And then you have these temptations lingering around your kitchen.
It's almost impossible. Your choices in lifestyle are yours. My choices are collaborative with 4 other people, and different considerations and things are involved in those decisions. So it makes it tough. So that's been one of the main hurdles, for me to really stick to something in the last few years. Because I've been successful in the past in sticking with programs, but that's made it very complicated.
So let me ask you this. It's interesting because, with each decade of life, our objectives become different. And I'm speaking personally, in my 20s, I just wanted to look like, I wanted to have the best physique possible. I wanted to get big and strong. That was definitely one of my motivations. And then that was, 20s and 30s. And now, being in the 4th decade of life, one of my biggest objectives when it comes to exercise and weight management is living a long life. My main goal is to live as long as possible and to have the least amount of disease, right? So to improve mortality and morbidity. And I know that weight management is, one of the ways in which I'm going to accomplish those things, hopefully accomplish those things. What now you want to embark on a journey? What are your objectives? What is your why, Jose?
Well, not naturally. We're both in our fourth decade of life, so that is actually the main reason. You start, especially when you're out of shape. First off, when you go to the doctor, everything is because you're weight. That's it. Doesn't matter what it is. You're going with a zit. You're like, doctor, I got a zit. They're like, okay, you need to lose 5 pounds. Like, well, what is that? Everything is attributed to that. So, but it is something that I get an ache and pain here and there, and you start thinking about, I'm in my fourth decade of life. Could this become something else? So that is one of the main reasons is having good health. You got to think of it. At our age.
But obesity is linked with so many diseases. I got to tell you, and I'm gonna say, the elephant in the room. And are they risk factors or are they associated? You know what? Whether they're associated factors or risk factors, the thing that we need to know is that being overweight has a number of negative impacts. Of course, we could argue the obvious things, right? The cholesterol. We could argue, glucose metabolism, right? Like diabetes. We could talk about potentially the stress that it puts on the musculoskeletal system, potentially, because I've been reading about other mechanisms as to how weight affects our body. But you know what's interesting that I've read is that while weight loss is important, just the process of losing weight in and of itself can have a positive impact on your health.
I got you.
You read it? Isn't that interesting? The process of losing weight, right, irrespective of any loss that may have occurred, is important in terms of improving health. So you have the obvious factors, right? The cholesterol, the glucose metabolism, all these things, right? But then you also have to look at, anxiety, depression, your outlook on life. And the process, the journey is just as important as the final outcome. So that's why it's one of the reasons why the scale alone is not should not be the sole barometer in terms of how we view or manage obesity and people being overweight. There's so many other scales that we need to use to say, you know what, changing lifestyle, modifying behavior is so important. And we simply can't use the scale because there are going to be other positive impacts that may not be reflected on the scale alone. You could go hard for 2 weeks, changing your diet, exercising, sleeping right, managing stress, only lose 2 pounds in 2 weeks, but would still have made a positive impact on your physiology. So Pamela said, what if we're alcohol? Your wife drinks wine and you're a recovering alcoholic. How would that work? Pamela, that's tough. I think, I'm just, again, I want to tell you that I'm speaking from an intuitive perspective. I don't have a basis to answer that. I would say that family dynamics play a big role in that, and somehow the people in that family have to reconcile what's best for the family as a unit. And there has to be some type of compromise. Maybe that person could drink alcohol, but not at home, especially if someone is a recovering alcoholic. Again, I'm adamantly attached to the thought that our discipline is as strong as our closest temptation. So if you're a recovering alcoholic and there's someone in the house drinking, I think it's just a matter of time that you succumb to drinking alcohol. So I think that is a family dynamic issue. Perhaps some counseling or a mediator may be required in order to address that. I would say that that's not easy. You want to read that, Jose?
Clara, I was raised in a Puerto Rican household. My mother is an amazing cook. Pernil, empanadas.
Empanadillas.
Was a way of her showing us love and bringing us joy through tough times. I live a healthy lifestyle and I'm a fitness enthusiast. However, overcoming the association that certain food equals happiness and help ease stress was difficult. That's another thing I've read. It's what do we eat for? We eat it for taste, emotion.
Jose, bring your mic closer to you a little.
Is that better?
Yeah, try to bring it closer, like the way I have mine.
Is that better?
Yes.
Okay. So yeah, we eat food for taste.
You know what it is though? We're not machines, Clara. I totally get it. We're not machines, so we can't say we're simply eating for nourishment. We can't say we're simply eating to build muscle and lose fat, or so that we can have enough energy to run our errands. We have to reconcile that we are humans, we are ecosystems, and there's a big social element of eating, right? Eating has a lot of cultural value. I too am Puerto Rican and grew up in a household where food was associated with family time. And certain foods at certain times of the year brought joy to the family. I haven't eaten pernil in over 20 years, by the way, but I remember the times and the joy that it brought. So, I think that the dose makes a poison, and in moderation, some of those foods are important because, again, we're not robots, we're not machines, and we have to live. We have to have that social kind of that dynamic, that layer into our lives, because otherwise we would simply be robots. So we can't think of food simply just as nourishment because it defies who we are as humans. We're very social. Humans are very social beings, and food is a big part of how we socialize. So I think what we have to reconcile, though, is that I'm repeating myself, but the dose makes a poison. Too much of these foods that, especially with what we now know, can be an impact. So we have to kind of limit some of these foods for Thanksgiving or Christmas or during our birthday or some type of special occasion. Absolutely can be applied to food as a healthy dynamic to redesign eating habits in a family. Like Clara said, food is love and community. Jose, I'm going to keep it real. I've fallen in love in the past simply by food. I'm not, like, real talk, man. Like, I'm like, a good meal on a consistent basis goes a long way. So yeah, you can't deny the psychological and social value that food has. Oh, I love food, cooking, gathering, breaking bread, but you're right, balance. Yeah, Mike, you know it. You know it. Let me see. Hold on. So you know, I think all these things are, important topics. Everything that we're talking about, like, addressing the elephant in the room, not necessarily tiptoeing around. I think that's critically important. Using language that is perhaps frank but not disparaging. I think that's important. Understanding that our discipline is limited by our closest temptations. I think that's also critical. And reconciling that food has a big psychosocial factor in who we are. But Jose, I kind of, I wanted to talk about your journey, though. Go ahead.
So, one of the main things, one of the big things is food in moderation, right? Like what you offer.
Yeah.
So, what are your feelings on that? I mean, you just said that your discipline is as strong as your strongest.
Your discipline is as strong as your closest temptation.
What do you think of the people that think that say?
And by the way, if anyone wants to use that, you better quote my name. I ain't playing. What's that again, Jose?
How would you address that? Eating less of the same portion. I mean, eating a small portion of the same food. You think that that's too dangerous? Or
no, again, I know.
Going back to Pamela's.
Mike, you better quote me, bro. You better quote me, bro. I think, I say this a lot, but it's really true. Like, Jose, check this out. Is a cup of coffee good for you? Does it have any value? Perhaps you could make a lot of arguments that, a cup of coffee has its value. It'll perk you up. It allows you to engage socially. It actually enhances glucose metabolism. There's been many studies showing that it has ergogenic value. So it has the ability to improve performance. So a cup of coffee has value. Look, I'm drinking a cup of coffee now. Jose is drinking his cup of coffee. However, if we were to drink 10 cups in a 4-hour period, does it still have its therapeutic effect? And, in medicine and in science, there's this, there's the old adage, the dose makes the poison. So, So no, let me say this because this is very important when it comes to diet, because we have zealots out there that say, oh, you can't eat carbohydrates anymore, or, you got to eat strictly protein, or you could only eat vegan diets. And you know what we know is that I'm going to say this very loudly and very slowly. There is no singular diet that has shown to be a cure-all or panacea. The best diet is the diet that one is adherent to. So if you're using some type of food pattern or a particular diet that you're not going to be adherent to in the long haul, then that diet is not going to be good for you. And when I'm talking about diet, I'm talking about creating some type of restriction, some type of calorie restriction, because ultimately that's what we know, right? We know that if we want to lose weight, it doesn't matter if you're eating Twinkies. I could lose weight eating Twinkies. I could lose weight eating McDonald's. How? If I create a calorie deficit, I'm going to lose, right? On the flip side of that argument, I could gain weight simply by eating arugula. Now you're saying, wait a minute, you can't gain weight eating arugula. What I'm saying is that theoretically, yes, I can. If I consume more than I expend, I can gain weight if I eat any type of food. So that's critically important to understand. However, when it comes to weight loss, we have to find our own unique way that is compatible with our life, that's compatible with our family dynamics, that we are going to be able to remain adherent to in the long haul, so that we could have a slow caloric, so that we can create a caloric deficit and slowly lose weight over the long haul. So whether it's cutting out soda, and that seems one of the more reasonable things, cutting out junk food, or perhaps doing intermittent daily fasting, or perhaps cutting down on some of the carbs. I'm not demonizing carbs. Carbs do not make you fat, but everything is moderation. When it's all said and done, if you're creating a deficit, you're going to lose. That's why the dose makes the poison. Too many carbs is a problem. It's not that carbs by itself makes you fat.
All right, so let me ask you the question again. Your wife drinks wine.
Yeah.
Right? Non-alcoholic. The dose is in the poison is in the dose, or the dose is in the poison. Can you have a glass of wine because you're creating a deficit?
Of course, you can have a glass of wine and have a deficit.
How do you manage that? So, I mean, would you say stay away from the wine altogether? I mean, is that a self-calibrating thing? What's your take on it? Stay away from it altogether? Have a glass of wine every now and then? Which one?
I think it comes down to moderation is important, but I think there's other elements. We're not machines. So we have to say, what is the social value? What is the psychosocial value? If you're not abusing something, and yes, you could keep it in moderation, and it allows you to have one-on-one time with your wife or your significant other, and you're not abusing it, and you could still remain within a caloric restriction that's leading to that ultimate goal, then of course a glass of wine is fine. You know what's interesting? And in research methodology, we have like all these we have what's called could you see my hands? Do you see my hands? Okay. All right, now you see my hands. We have this dependent variable, which is the outcome, and then you have an independent variable, right? And so the thought behind this is that if you take this drug, it's going to lead to this outcome. But sometimes things don't necessarily fall on that linear causal pathway. Sometimes things deviate from that linear pathway. And what I'm saying is, when it comes to alcohol, right? There's research that say, moderate drinking can enhance your lifespan, right? But is it the drinking? We spoke about this, I think, last week. Is it the drinking that enhances your lifespan, or is it that the people that drink often socialize, and it's the socialization, the intimacy that you're creating with your partner, your wife, that's increasing your feeling of well-being, that's improving your health? That is critically important. Again, we are not machines, so we can't think of food simply as nourishing our muscles for recovery and giving us enough energy so that we could run our errands. We have to add that psychosocial component. And one can argue that having wine within the context of still creating a calorie deficit has its benefits if it's creating or maintaining intimacy with your family, with your significant other. So I hope that answered your question.
Yeah, that was better. Developing a healthy relationship with anything and understanding why we do what we do. Think about what we're thinking about, creates balance and what we're doing. So that relationship with understanding is a balance. Awareness. I think you can see that. I could totally.
Developing a healthy relationship with anything and understanding why we do what we do. Yeah. You hear me? Chantel, I'm not sure if you're talking about my mic.
Maybe is it my mic?
Yeah, yeah, you got to bring that mic closer.
I have to get a better mic. Is what I'm gonna have to do.
You got that Teddy Riley mic.
Yeah, I got that old school.
You got that. Oh, yeah. So wait, I want.
We had a sound check before the show. I asked you, can you hear me? And you said everything was fine.
Hold on, Jose. It says developing healthy relationships with anything and understanding why we do what we do creates balance. Yes, Pamela. Yes, it took time for that to click, but yes, knowing the why is so important. Okay, there's our guest. He's coming up right now. Could you link him in, Jose? What's up, Chris? What's going on, man?
Oh, Doc, how's everything?
I'm doing well. I'm good. Thank you for coming on the show, man. I really appreciate your time this morning. I know you had a busy morning.
Yeah, running around here, there, everywhere. But busy's good. Good.
Good. So, the name of this show is Courage to Continue, from Test to Testimonials, right? And the central theme is that the human body is very adaptable, right? If we impose a stress or a particular demand on the body will adapt in some way. And you can't deny that weight loss is one of the manifestations in which the body changes. It's a way that the body adapts, right? You change your lifestyle, certain behaviors, and you start losing weight. You start feeling good. So one of the reasons I wanted to have Chris on is because I wanted him to share his experience, because he's been able to make some changes in his life over the past few years and have sustainable effect on his weight. And anyway, tell me about it. Tell me about where were you before you embarked on this journey? How much did you weigh?
Well, I want to first say that I have to thank you for actually getting me on the journey as far as weight, because I was a little lost there for a while as far as finding a clear path on what to do as far as weight loss. At one point, with a visit to your office, I was at 250 pounds. And 250 pounds, I thought I looked good for 250 pounds. I don't know, some kind of tricks plays on you that you feel like, I thought I looked good. I thought I felt good at 250 pounds. But Dr. Hernandez was telling me during the time that the body hasn't changed for thousands of years. It's the same way. We were built for movement. So one of the things we had to do is we had to get him, you have to get him, you have to move, you have to, walk, get into the process of running. And then with that, as far as with that next step was intermittent fasting. So it was a balance of intermittent fasting and moving. And that's what I started slow. It took some time as far as the fasting, because you're used to eating at a certain time, morning times, eating, when Dr. Hernandez was actually saying that we usually, way back when we were hunters and gatherers, we wouldn't eat in the morning time. We would eat in the afternoon. So around 2:00 was around the time we would move around in the morning time, and then in the afternoon is when the time when we would eat. So what I did was, listening to Dr. Hernandez, I would work out in the morning time. I would go work out, go to the gym, or walk, wouldn't eat, and then by 2:00 in the afternoon is when I would start to actually get something to eat. And I saw a tremendous difference as far as energy, weight loss, everything. It was just a total difference. But as Dr. Hernandez says, the mindset too, you have to be consistent with it. And that's one thing I kind of struggled with in the beginning also, as far as being consistent. So consistency as far as intermittent fasting and moving, exercise, and all.
How much do you weigh now, Chris?
I'm 190. Consistent.
Wow. And how long have you been able to maintain that weight? How long has it been?
It's like about at least 2 years now. At least 2 years, and it's like it's a night and day kind of thing. It's, you know, it's one of the things that Dr. Hernandez stresses is consistency. And that's another thing you'll struggle with in the beginning is consistency, because you'll think that, you know, you're on the right path and everything's going well, but then all of a sudden you have eating in the morning time, eating, you know, not eating good foods in the morning time. But as far as getting back on track and being consistent and being on track as far as intermittent fasting and exercise, once you get into that habit, you're good. And all with Dr. Hernandez, big time.
Chris, what were some of the things that you when you struggle with consistency? Like what were some of the
Just
things that you did, like, to make sure that you stayed on course with your plan?
You know, the thing is that you have to listen when someone is giving you good information. You have, you know, it's easier said than done, but listening and being on, you know, staying on point with what they're saying. And one of the things I struggle with is that breaking old habits. You're used to doing certain things a certain way, as far as, you know, you eat in the morning time, you know, it just becomes a habit forming, you know, you bacon, egg, cheese sandwich in the morning time, you know, you drink a Pepsi anywhere through, you know, you think you drink sodas during the course of the day. And when you can break those bad habits and turn those bad habits into good habits, as far as, all right, now I'm not going to eat it this time. I'm going to wait until, you know, 2:00 in the afternoon, 2 o'clock, you know, to eat. And then I'm going to eat healthy during that time. But prior to me eating, I'm going to go ahead and start exercising. It's great.
Chris, we were talking before you came on. We were talking about, you know, the different themes that kind of play themselves out when it comes to managing or losing weight. Mm-hmm. And one of them is that our discipline is as strong as our closest temptation. And Jose, his wife, is a great cook. Mm-hmm. And I know that your wife is a great cook. You've told me many stories about how good. How do you manage to be in the same household of someone who's not necessarily on the same path as you and who cooks that well? How are you able to inspiration or eat something altogether different?
It starts with you know, the mind, something that Dr. Hernandez talked about. You know, you have to be conscious as far as, you know, what you're actually eating. So one of the things I do is I actually cut back on my portions. Before I used to kind of like have, you know, the
dose makes a poison, man.
Yeah, and then I cut back on the portion. So, you know, before, you know, if I, you know, I don't know, if I had a full plate of food, or, you know, mac and cheese, I would cut back, you know, considerably on those portions. So I would have a smaller portion of macaroni and cheese, smaller portion of the chicken, you know, those kind of foods that were kind of like not the best for you, but they just cutting, you know, just.
Let me ask you this: aside from cutting back, because you know, one thing is that I don't want listeners to think that you know, we have to be robots. You know, we spoke about, you know, that psychosocial element of food. You know, it brings people together. It brings family you know, it's the central theme in family gatherings, right? Think about Thanksgiving. You know, the associated items when we think of Thanksgiving as turkey and ham and baked mac and cheese. That, how do you, well, what should I say? What I'm saying is that social value, have you been able to maintain the culture of food while still maintaining your weight loss? How have you been able to be a part of your family, a part of social gatherings, mm-hmm. a part of being a good husband to your wife and the way she's living and the way she cooks, while still being on your own personal journey?
Just being conscious about what I'm eating. Just be, you know, instead of just going into that whole, you know, lull of just eating, you know, anything at any time, eating at night. Still being part, as you said, being part of the culture in a way that I'm conscious of what I'm eating and how much I eat. I think that's the key. I can still eat a little bit, but not eat as much as I used to. I used to, you know, indulge myself big time on on the foods that she was
I,
cutting back.
I think that's so important because, you know, sometimes, you know, we live in this like society, right, where it's so polarized. Jose, we were talking about that. I think Mike was talking about that today as well, on another show. But we live in this polarized society where we tend to like demonize carbohydrates, or we demonize fat. And here you are, 2 years later, you've been able to maintain a 70-pound weight loss, and you haven't taken anything out your diet. You've just modified the amount that you're eating. And so I think that's important for anyone who's listening out there. It's that you don't have to make drastic changes, because a lot of times these drastic changes aren't going to be sustainable. You know, it's one of the things, and I know it's very anecdotal, but in my experience with people who've went the keto diet or the paleo diet, yes, they were able to lose weight, but when they came off of it, they gained a significant amount of weight. And I think a lot of it is because those harsh, very, I guess, those diets that demonize certain food types are difficult to sustain over the long haul. And I think that's what makes it so difficult. And I think, you know, you said it many times, moderation is the
well, it's one of the takeaways that I see here, and I see it in you, and how you go about with your regimen. You're very aware, and let Pamela just put that up, metacognition. And I think in the way society is organized now, where there's food in abundance, we fill up the plate. What I'm getting from both of you guys is you're just aware of what you're aware of what you're putting in your body, how much of it, and the way society is. I think we just go around and you don't really think about that. You got to think about what you're eating. And if we're at a point in society, you got to really think about it. You gotta. It's a critical thinking type of thing. In order to manage it, if you just let it go, you're gonna be obese, just like overweight, just like most of us are, because there's so much food. There's so much. The food isn't good. It's processed. You gotta really be conscious of what you're eating.
How do you talk about it though, Chris and Jose? Chris, how do you have conversations like in what I do, and in speaking with other healthcare providers? It's not uncommon where I've heard where healthcare providers tiptoe around the subject. And I find it fascinating because it's a very important topic, but it's a very provocative one. How do you talk about these things, like with loved ones, Chris, about, you know, your journey, about the importance of weight loss? Is it something that you think is provocative, or do you think, or do you simply have frank conversations and say, hey, look, I love you. This is what I think. This is what I think you should do. How do you manage to navigate through this very touchy subject with people that you love?
That's a good question. And it depends on the audience. I think it comes down to, you know, because I have all girls. I have 5 daughters, and depending on which child it is, as far as some are more sensitive, you know, some than others. I have to be a little bit more, you know, I have to be careful as far as how I explain it to them. But actually, you know, making sure that my point is clear as far as what I want, but being sensitive to their feelings. While with other children, I can be a little bit more blunt and just tell them straight up what's going on, and you know, and they can, you know, the message is clear. You know, just getting that message across, but making sure that, you know, I'm conscious of who I'm talking to at that particular point, as far as at that time, and you know, but the message, you know, but overall, it's still the same message. You know, we have to back it out, cut back on those portions, and you know, for every little, you know, for the little, you know, for a little bit of mac and cheese that you eat, you have to eat more, you know, more fruits, more vegetables, and get out there and just walk, just get out there and do more exercise, and you'll feel the difference. It's just going into the process of going and, you know, of starting it, and once you get on it, and get on that journey, and you start going on that journey, then just maintaining it. But yeah, it depends on the audience that you have, you know.
That's a great answer, Chris, because we were talking earlier. I've been watching the show Cobra Kai. I don't know if you've seen it.
Yeah, yeah, yes.
And we were talking about language, and Ivan kind of said that you got to be measured and not disparaging. But I think the most important thing about language is you got to know your audience. Some people are more sensitive than others.
I know, but
that's a big part of it, and it's an excellent point. So when you're talking, you have 4 different daughters. You got to address the information. The information is the same. You just said it, but who you're talking to, you gotta calibrate how you deliver that message. I find that's a great insight.
Yes.
yeah, no. I think the intended recipient, you have to carefully craft how you're going to say something based on who the recipient of that information is. But I would say just globally and societally, and it's funny how this show Cobra Kai has reflected this. We've become very sensitized. Like, everybody gets a trophy, right? Everybody, we don't discuss the things that are obvious. We don't discuss the elephants in the room in the way that we did in the 80s. And I think in some extent, we have to be somewhere in the middle. We can't avoid these things because avoidance of these subject matters altogether doesn't serve the person and doesn't serve us collectively for the better. I think we have to have these difficult, uncomfortable conversations in order to help people. And we can't deny the fact, and this is the thing, we can't deny the fact that weight is associated with health. And if we if in fact we care for our loved ones, if we loved our loved ones, right, we have to try as best as we can to impress upon them how important weight management is. And it's tough. You have to find the right language. That's one of the things that we were saying. We have to find the right language when we're communicating.
Ivan, we're at the top of the hour. Chris,
Yeah.
Thank you for coming on. I found what you said great. I'm gonna apply it to my eating habits. I think in today's show, everything that we covered, Ivan is on the. Me and Ivan talk about why we do this podcast. Ivan is a teacher. He likes to get the information out there. I'm here for selfish reasons. I wanna take the information in and find out different strategies from different people. And you just shared some good ones. I think awareness is the key takeaway. We touched on it in different ways. Ivan's talking about your discipline is as strong as your stronger temptation. But I think all of that points to you just got to know what you're doing, what you're putting in your body. And it's funny because we were talking about language and everything, and you hit it right on the nose. Know your audience and be conscious of the language that you put out there, because the problem is the problem. You may deliver the message in different ways, but it's still that problem, and that's what you need to be aware of as well. I don't know if you want to add anything to that, Ivan, but
no, I think you did a phenomenal job wrapping that up, Jose. You did a phenomenal job.
Thank you, Chris. Go ahead, Ivan.
No. You did a phenomenal job. Thank you. Chris, I want to thank you. I know you had a busy morning, but thanks for coming on. Do you want to, you have any last words, anything that you want to tell our audience in terms of your journey? Any closing remarks?
Yes, just the mental aspect of it is just knowing that with the journey, that sometimes your mind will sometimes try to get you off track, and just keeping your mind strong, as you mentioned, self-discipline, being disciplined with it and being consistent. That's that's Dr. Hernandez, stresses that, being consistent, having that discipline and just sticking with it, because your mind will sometimes try to get back to those, old habits, those old bad. Please just keep your mind strong and just stay with it, and you'll see you'll see the life changing. It's about lifestyle, changing your life. It's a lifestyle changing experience, but it's for the betterment. It's for the betterment of yourself. Then others will see it and it'll help them out too. You know, I can't stress that enough. When people see you going through it, it helps them out too. You know, and encourages them and gets them over. So.
Well, thanks again for coming on, and thanks for being an inspiration, man, to other people. You won't
Appreciate it.
You probably don't even realize how many people this is going to impact. So thank you for sharing your story, your testimonial, and I hope it extends itself multifold to as many people that are willing to heed your advice and your journey.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. I greatly appreciate it. Thank you very much.
It's our pleasure, man. All right, Chris. All right, Jose. Thank you, guys. All right.